Welcome to a new episode of Liberating Faith, the SheLoves podcast. My name is Leah Abraham. I'm the editor-in-chief of SheLoves Magazine, and today we have an extra special episode because me and Lindiwe and Mpofu get to talk to Idelette McVicker about her first book that's coming out April 12th, Recovering Racist, Dismantling White Supremacy, and Reclaiming Our Humanity. Can you believe it? Your first book is almost out.
Max.
Yeah, I know I feel like I want to pinch myself like every day. I'm like, I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful to be here, honestly. Yes.
What does it feel like? You're sort of in the marketing portion of this entire process. What does it feel like getting ready to share this with the world?
It feels a little bit like my heart is walking around outside my body right now. Like it's like people are sending me little text message. Oh, we got a shipping confirmation. And as people are, there's like a few people who are living in my city that I've like, or like my mother-in-law or my mentor, like I've given them a copy, right? And as they've been sending me like little messages about that they've been reading it and they finished it and like this is their thoughts or just their feedback, it's been really, really special. Just to hear people's hearts and reflecting back and what people are seeing in it and hearing in it and reading in it. I have an uncle who read it like right away, and here's this man who has precious heart, and he just read the whole book, and as he was talking to me about it, he just had tears in his eyes, and I'm like, wow, the people that it reaches that I didn't even really think about. It's just so special, right? And he says, I've known you he's known me for 22 years. And he says, but I didn't know you. He says, I didn't know this part of you or about you. Like, I mean, I talk about this man Flip in the book. He used to be a gardener in our in our home when I was a child. And when he was talking about Flip, that's when he had tears in his eyes. And I was like, oh, this is so precious to me because this is exactly how I moved through that story. I walked with that story for so long to honor it and to kind of go back and I just held Flip's presence in my body and in my life, in my consciousness for so long. And to now have somebody else honor that person in the same way, just by reading this and reflecting on that, it's precious. It feels really precious. Thank you.
Oh my, that's wonderful. For those who might not know about the book, do you want to give us a quick summary about what the book is about and who it's intended for?
Okay, so I have a copy here on my desk, and I actually still have the advanced reader's copy that I've marked up a little bit and just and so it really is my story that started when I was born, first of all, into apartheid in South Africa, right in the height of apartheid. And but then as a white Afrikaner woman, how I was in this white bubble, and then how the awakening happens when I first read a book that had been banned previously. When I was 16 years old, I start reading this book and I'm like, everybody's been lying to me. Leaders, faith leaders, the church, media, government, everybody's been lying to me about what's really happening. And I talk about, and I don't say this in the book necessarily, but it was like the things that I've been hearing in my life, little snippets that you catch like on some of the newspapers or in the checkout line or somewhere where or just conversations, and you catch snippets of things, and all of a sudden those things that were on the margins, I realized it's like everything stood up almost immediately together, and I realized, oh, that was the truth. Actually, that always was the truth. And it was just like this rise, like this thing, just this truth that rose up, and everything, and like this other consciousness or this formation of self that that had been created by whiteness, it just had to crumble. And my understanding of who I was in the world and who I belonged to and what matters actually, what matters, um, it it crumbled, and I had to go find, what is it that actually matters. Like how does love, what is this Jesus that we've been talking about in church every Sunday, and yet this Jesus excludes people from walking through the doors, the very doors that we were sitting in. Like, this is not the same Jesus. And that Jesus in that white church is not the Jesus I want to follow. And so for a long time, I just left that. I was like, I thought that church and Jesus was the same thing. Right. And so I just had to leave that. And so I talk about that faith journey as well, how then I meet Jesus again in Taiwan, of all places. Right. And it's just like this Jesus who I've always known. And yet this time it's not white Jesus, right? Like now it's like this Jesus with this face of all the nations, right? And yet this Jesus then compels me to really look at my to really look at my story, and to see that to be a person of faith, to be a follower of Jesus, also meant that I had to look for racial justice. And that was liberation for me too. And so my faith from that moment became an anti-racist faith. It was never disconnected. It was always the same thing. So I talk about that too in the book. I have 20 stations of liberation in here. Just things that I have been learning across the years that I invite people into. Like, first of all, acknowledging our racism, the very first thing. Awakening, imagining a different world, getting comfortable with discomfort, facing ugly truth, the liberating Jesus, the heart of a learner, mutuality. And there's 20 of these. And it was almost like I felt like there was a bit of a map in my body of how things were just, it's like, once I kind of understood, like it was really important for me to seek justice as a follower of Jesus, like to seek justice. And then I was like, oh yeah, justice seeker. And then the next it's like the next chapter flipped, and God said, okay, now I want you to learn how to be a peacemaker. And I was like, oh, wow. Because that requires to see the humanity and honor the humanity in every person, including the person that we might want to call our enemy, right? And so there's what has become this kind of map, and it's not linear. I go into it still. This isn't, like, we call it recovering races, because this is an ongoing journey for me. And I move into it and through it, and in the day and in months and in seasons, right? So there's 5 parts. I call it wake up, leave, repent. Repentance is a huge piece of this book. Recalibrate. How do we be put back together again? And then repair. And that's also a really important part for me of this book. So yeah, there we go. There's a bit of a kind of an overview.
That's a beautiful snapshot of your heart.
Thank you, friend. Thank you.
Lindy, what was it like for you to read Idelette's book? What's your Amazon review go?
I was so emotional in the first few pages, right? Now I feel the tears coming back. So part of my story is I lived in South Africa for about 10 years in very white dominant pockets of the country in the Western Cape, which is just beautiful landscape, incredible wine, beautiful food spots, but the inequality is so stark, right? All those beautiful experiences are painted with racial colors. I remember times when I was living in Stellenbosch, which is like wine country. Each time I was at a restaurant or a cafe or something, I could just feel the stares of, oh, you're not at the right side of this transaction. You're supposed to be waiting on people that come here to eat, right? That was always apparent. Or I would go out to eat with friends, and when the waiter, who was usually a person of color, would come and, you know, give us the bill, they would expect my white friend to pay. It was just, they would look to them, they would give them the bill. So so many small interactions were painted with race and what it means to be Black in Africa, which is that has a lot of layers in it. So I had moved through the world with a very particular picture of white South Africans, white Afrikaner South Africans, very much like very suspicious, very guarded, not really sure of their intentions. And reading the first few pages of Idelette's book just brought me to tears. It's very difficult for me to put into words, because it was this feeling of like a sisterhood in those pages, just in her pouring out her heart, just in the introduction. I was already a mess. And it felt to me like it was so clear how her intentionality with each way that she unfolds her story, it was so precious. It's like, while this is your story, Idelette, it's like, it's really holy ground in the way that you speak about it, in the way that you share it, right? It's such an invitation for people to experience who you are. Do you know, to be fair, when Idelette first asked me to read the book, I was just ready to, you know, be intellectual and think, oh, this is problematic, this is and go through it in that way. But it's such a hard story. It's very emotional. It's an emotional journey through your life. It's an emotional journey through the different lessons that you've learned and the different takeaways and the different challenges. And one thing that I really appreciated is that it's not linear, like you said before. It's not a quick fix. It's not a 12-step program, in as much as I really appreciate that lens. I'll speak to that a bit later. It's not a quick fix. And I think that's very important right now. And to be able to read that as a Black woman, knowing that this is, you know, I'm not the intended audience per se for this book, right? It's just so healing to know that someone, that you, Idelette, find this, you've gone through this journey, you know, like you were talking about your uncle, people that real lives that are being touched and impacted by your story, in your willingness to share it with such intentionality, with such courage. It's so encouraging as a Black woman to know that, you know, we've been protesting this whole time. We've been screaming about, you do the work, right? Like, white people do the work, you figure it out, you unpack all the different layers of what whiteness and racism does to paint your world. And it's so beautifully written in this book. And it's just so many emotions, Yeah.
Thank you. Wow. Yeah, I'd asked Lindy to read it in the beginning because I was like, oh, okay. I need a Black woman, and I need a Black South African woman to read this book. And if this is not working, then, you know, like, yeah, it was just really important. And when you gave me that feedback, it was just, that felt like holy ground to me, right? It's like, okay. Yeah, so thank you too for even being willing to read it. I don't know, right?
Thank you for the tears, Idelette. Appreciate that very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Idelette, I'm curious, because I've sort of seen you like a little after the conception of the book, but like I've seen you like do the work of writing it, do the work of editing it, doing the work of marketing, and you're like right now on the labor pains process before it goes out to the world, right? And I think, at least to me, this is more than just the story that you have in this book, right? This whole process for you. And so I'm going to steal a question that you had in the book, is how do you want to emerge out of this process?
This is the first two words that come to me are just fully alive, right? Yeah, that's fully human. I mean, I think that's the subtitle, and dismantling white supremacy and the reclaiming our humanity. Like that was very intentional for me, because I honestly felt like this was me reclaiming my humanity. Like that had been, so much more had been stripped and stolen and ripped away from people. And in the process, when we do that, and when my ancestors have done it, and the generations before me, there is a stripping and a ripping away and a dehumanizing of the self too, right? You can't dehumanize somebody else and not lose some of your humanity, right? And so, and it is felt down the generations. And so, yeah, for me, that was I feel like this whole process is a liberation, right? So it's becoming fully human, becoming fully alive, emerging out of that white, like I'd say whiteness, and in this cocoon of transformation. Really, like that's what I'm hoping this would be, like this cocoon of transformation. And then you emerge as this, oh, this is who I've always been meant to be, as a human being who understands identity, who understands culture, my culture, who can trace back my story and look at the ugly parts, and be brave and courageous enough to say, I own it, I stand in it. And even that is a liberation, right? Because you're like, I gotta stand in that, right? And not to shy away from that. And then that is part of the liberation process. And that was for me a process, right? So fully alive, fully human, right?
I'm going to ask you that question in like 6 months. I'm wondering if it will change.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just really, I'm excited for what awakening and being fully alive for you will look like this season.
Yeah.
I love the birds. I don't know who's got the birds in the background, but I love that. Oh, I love it. Oh, Saskatchewan, yay. Oh, I love that.
I have another question for you. You talk a lot about your relationship with your ancestors, and the complicated relationship you have with your ancestors. I guess do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And I think, so this was a big part for me about, like a big part of the wrestling for me. And I think part of also why I felt like, I think this is a reason why I needed to write this book as well, because I think there are some questions that white people struggle with that are different, like a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
And so this was one of the questions I struggled with, and a Black, Indigenous, or person of color could not answer that question for me, right? And what do I do with my racist ancestors? What do I do with those who have gone before, who have not walked in a way of love, right? In beloved community. And so, and for example, I would think about my Oma, and I'm literally sitting with a little blanket that she's crocheted on my lap, right? So my Oma, I loved her. She was like just the grandparent I knew kind of the best, and she lived close. We picked her up every Sunday. We would go to the beach sometimes, or she would go with us away for the weekend, and she knew what I liked and picked up my favorite little things. Like she always picked up salami for me. Funniest thing. So cute. She picked up a little package of salami. Oh, so cute. And I just loved it, right? And then I just hold her hand or whatever. But she had a picture in her home when I grew up, and she had moved into a senior's home for a long time already. So this was going back into memory. But I remember there was a picture of H.F. Verwoerd, who was the architect of apartheid, and he was on her wall. And so this Oma, who I loved, who taught me how to play cards, who brought me salami, was also the person who thought this man should live on her wall in her living room. And I was like, how do I reconcile that? This person who created this oppressive system that, yeah. And so I was like, how do I do both? And so, and even in writing the book and my dad passing, as like right before, like actually right after my deadline, there was something about me having to wrestle with kind of this cloud of witnesses, right? Like, and so I mean, in the process of writing it, I had to figure out what do I do with my ancestors? Because often when I was listening in, every time, even Saturday, I was listening into a conversation and people were talking a lot about ancestors, right? And the ancestors are cheering us on, and you know, I'm supported by my ancestors, or I'm standing on the shoulders of my ancestors. And as a white woman, as a white Afrikaner woman, I was like, I don't think I can stand on their shoulders. I don't know what to do with that, because there is a lot of stuff there, right? There's shame, there's guilt, there's very mixed feelings about that. It's not simple, right? Yet I love this Oma, but I also acknowledge her racism. So how do I hold that? And so I think one day it was just I was literally loading or unloading the dishwasher, and I just realized my ancestors are in the place of love that they have passed on. And if how I understand kind of this belonging of when we pass on, it's to be in a place of love. And to be in a place of love means you see everything with truth and you see it with love, and they would see what had happened and what I'm doing with love, and they would understand how they'd messed up, and that they would be cheering me on. And so then, not as reading another book, and an indigenous elder was talking about that, and he said, yes, they're in the place of light. Yeah. And I was like, this is what I've been looking for, to know, okay, maybe they did all the wrong things while they were on Earth, like, or they did but were part of it, and managed and sustained and created these oppressive systems, right? And participated in it and benefited from it. But now they would be cheering me on, right? So yeah, it's complex, right? But that has helped me I can sit with my grandmother's blanket on my knees and hold the complexity of that, right? There's love and there's acknowledgement. Yes. Okay.
It was a very helpful framework for me, because right now I'm trying to understand my relationship with my ancestors, knowing that most of them did not treat women well. Most of them actively, there's just casteism and classism that was acted upon. And for the past few months, it's been weird for me to think about. It was almost as if I didn't want to claim them as my ancestors, right? So it was a really fascinating framework for me reading that, to how do I look at it differently. And I'm still working through that. I don't think I've I've gotten to that point of understanding. I'm still angry at my ancestors, right? But yeah, thank you for that. Lindy, is that similar for you at all?
So when you were speaking, Idelette, about your Oma, it reminded me of one of my closest friends when I was in university, was Afrikaans. And we would, I would speak a lot to his family back home. We're really close, but I hadn't actually met them. Mm-hmm. And then one long weekend, they lived, in a small country town, which is very typical. So we went for the weekend, and when I arrived at his parents' place, they were so nice. I had spoken to them on the phone so many times. And on their like their little display cabinet in their living room, they had these china plates with the old South African flag on them. I was just thrown off so much. I sat the whole weekend in such a tension of these lovely people who had welcomed me into their home, who fed me constantly, who made me endless cups of tea, who I truly loved, right? Who had raised this incredible young man who was a seeker of justice and all these good things. And in their living room sat the old South African flag on like precious china. And I remember sitting with that tension the entire weekend and not knowing what to do about it at all. And also in hindsight, I didn't know what to do with it, but I also knew that wasn't really my place to do anything about it, right? In a way that it's something that they had to unpack, and I didn't want to be the person, the midwife, so to speak, to help them get there. And I was still in university. My thoughts were not, I didn't have the right language to express what I was feeling. I just knew that this was just off and what?
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate hearing you speak about the complexity there, right? And the wrestle that comes with it. And I really appreciated hearing you talk about the love, that they're sitting in love, they're sitting in light. And that's in the afterlife, right? And I wonder about people who've gone before us that are not yet ancestors in that way. People have very complicated relationships with parents that are, racist in a lot of ways, that are sexist, that are homophobic. It's just daily relationships that we struggle with. And it's very messy. I still don't know what to do with a lot of that, except recommend your book.
As I'm hearing you speak, I'm just so mindful of how your whole weekend was affected by a symbol on a teacup, right? They were probably oblivious to it.
Yeah.
Right? But your whole weekend was affected by that. And it reminds me of the conversation around the Confederate flag in the US, right? And then people ask, well, why does it matter? Like, right? And I'm like, here, your whole week, your whole well-being in that space was disrupted and violated because of a symbol on a teacup. And it spoke as loudly as the generosity and the kindness and the love, right? And I'm hearing this and I'm like, we gotta remove those symbols. This is what it does right here. That is what that symbol does. And every time you see that flag or when you walk into that living room, right? Okay, this one, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Wow. This makes me mad too. Just the power of symbols, right? Like this is it's not a small thing. I'm like, here is a human being who is right, like your wellness in the world and like how you can move in the world is disrupted by a flipping symbol on a teacup, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, in South Africa as well, there's an ongoing conversation about renaming streets or, monumental buildings after heroes of the struggle against apartheid.
Yeah.
And it's the same people that wouldn't have been aware of what that symbol on a teacup would have meant to me that would throw an absolute fit about renaming a street name because they can't pronounce the clicks in it, because it's costing the government too much money, it's taxpayers' money to stay in street names. Street names don't matter. Yeah, that's very infuriating.
Yeah, and I just think every time you see that name, like that is a violence every time, right? Oh, yeah, I know. And how does it liberate us to learn to speak clicks and to, like that expands your world when you learn a new language, when you put newness literally in your mouth, right?
Yeah.
Literally.
Or say it wrong for the next 10 years. Or, just be wrong. That's fine. It's okay. Don't speak perfect English and we're fine. It's okay.
I think that's a quote. Let's be wrong for the next 10 years. Yeah. Oh. I mean, yeah. I'm just thinking about names for sports teams in the US, like in the North American context now, right? Yeah. Yeah. The violence of that, right? Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
I had another question written down, and now I'm realizing it's not really a question. I just wrote down the quote that you had in the book by Sandy Swakobe. Am I saying their name right? Where racism is spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
I want to unpack that with y'all.
Yeah. Yes, and these were Lerato Kobe. You can go follow her on Instagram. She's an incredible theologian in South Africa and just emerging and doing beautiful work. And when I read that, I was like, that's what I've been looking for. Just that, even the naming of that, right? I feel like it is. It's like, it just is, right? So racism is spiritual. So I don't know. Yeah.
Does it reframe anything for you?
Are you asking me, Idelette? Yeah. I didn't think it reframed anything. I felt like it confirmed everything to me. I feel like the work that Reza Menachem is doing with embodied healing and embodied liberation, somatic abolition, right? I feel like the spirituality of the body, of how this stuff sits in our body. I think if we're people of follow Jesus and who believes in the Holy Spirit, I think this is the stuff that it should excite us, that we can heal these things, right? Like that this is spiritual, that there's reparation that can be done, right? I think this is like it can be done. I think so. I think that for me was just like a confirmation. Yes. I didn't feel like I could say it until Lerato said that. Yeah.
Thinking of racism as being spiritual for me reminds me of a church that I was part of in Cape Town, predominantly white church, very much into like deliverance and the Holy Spirit and like prophetic prayer and that sort of thing. And in Cape Town, there is a monument called Rhodes Memorial that is after Cecil John Rhodes, who was like how would you describe him? Like the main
colonizer
throughout Africa, right? Like, yeah.
Lots of money. Yeah, the money. Lots of money.
in so many different African countries. He led the colonial project, right? And there's this memorial that's built in his honor. It's like a little shrine. It's very creepy up there. And so with part of this church, we would have prayer groups where we would go and pray at Rose Memorial, right? Because we were praying about strongholds and, you know, all these like Christianese reclaiming the city, praying for revival. And we would be up at 5 a.m. because it's very important to pray in the dark when you're part of that kind of group. And I fully believed it. I was fully into it, fully into reclaiming the city, fully into praying for revival to come in Cape Town. And then a few years later, I want to say about 3 years later, one of the statues at Rhodes Memorial was defaced. And the conversation started around the significance of Rhodes, the colonizer. And the movement was born about, the hashtag was Rhodes Must Fall. So the decolonial project that started in Cape Town and the University of Cape Town was, you know, it came from there. And so we were sat there in church and all the people of color were like, we prayed, and look what happened, look what's happening. Right? Then this tiny pocket of us and the rest of our church is sort of like, oh, this is scary. Like, we need to pray against the protests. It's getting scary. And
oh my word.
This is is this not what we're praying for?
Exactly, right?
Is this not reclaiming the city? Because it's not Rhodes' the city. And anyway, so I think of that story and I think of how the focus of deliverance and the prophetic and that sort of thing never highlights racism. As part of this church, there was a deliverance course that we'll go through, and there was a long list, like about 5 pages of things that you could get deliverance from because their root was spiritual. And I laugh about it now because one of the first things on that list was acupuncture. Like if you had been to an acupuncture session, if you had done some yoga, you know, you had to go through the steps and repent and be delivered of that. And it was an alphabetic list, right? Hence acupuncture is one of the first ones. Scroll down to R, there's no racism.
Oh, are you serious?
No.
What?
There was ancestral worship because the connotation of that is Black, right? Like African traditional religion that you have to repent of, but you don't have to repent of, you know, building a shrine to whiteness. That just brought back those memories for me, and thinking about if we as people, you know, if as people that believe in the Holy Spirit could attack this with the same vim. I don't know what the English word for vim is. The same because it's literally it's an actual stronghold that is affecting so many people's daily lives, that is painting the world that we live in. But it's not on the list. It's just not on the list.
It hasn't been on the list and it needs to be on the list, right?
That's it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Wow.
Acupuncture.
This is the things that are unknown, right? Yeah, I've had a huge spiritual experience when I had acupuncture. I was like, okay, right? Anyway, yeah.
God forbid that you relax and, like, you know, heal your nervous system from acupuncture.
Right. Yeah. It's just what's the unknown. When when things are unknown, people are scared, right? So yeah. Wow. I love that you were praying. So were you intentionally praying at the Rhodes Memorial?
Yeah.
Like very thinking because this has to fall, like that kind of thing. Yeah, as a root of.
It was just an unspoken thing. Like when we are praying at the Rose Memorial, the first thing you think of is the colony, right? So having conversations with other people, that's what we had in mind.
Yeah.
But we're all praying in the same circle, but we're not praying for the same thing.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, powerful. What are you thinking about that, Leah? About racism being spiritual?
I'm actually thinking about casteism right now. I'm thinking like if casteism is spiritual. Yeah, I'm right there. I'm just at the middle of that sentence, trying to figure out what right. I'm really early on in understanding the role casteism has played in my life, in my family, and in the structures and systems I've lived in. And like when I say casteism is spiritual, like I feel it in my belly, like that. It's not a great feeling in my belly, but I just feel that something just being pulled. And I'm wondering if this will, because I keep subtly talking to my parents about it, just to help reframe the conversations that we're having. But now I'm wondering if will it knowing that casteism is spiritual, does that change the way I approach talking and processing it? Because I don't know, when something is considered spiritual, it really, I understand things a bit differently. I look at it very differently. So yeah, I was just thinking and processing that.
Wow. Wow. I'd love to hear more as you unpack and as you just as you move through this, right? Yeah. I think for me, I understood racism as spiritual when I met that Jesus in Taiwan. And I felt like I didn't have other people who understood it in the same way.
Right.
And I didn't understand. I was like, I didn't have language. I didn't know that's why I was thinking about that in that way. Because I was like, that was just how I understood my faith. How I understood following Jesus was like, we got to deal with this. This is like the biggest thing in my faith that I have to deal with. And here's my faith is right here with this, right? And so I just didn't have language. And I think I was so surprised when Christians were talking about this. I was like, what? Why is everybody not talking about this? I was so surprised. I was like, I just wanted to talk to people, and there was like this wall. I didn't understand, right? So I think it just took time. It's on the white side of the story, right? Like it just took a lot of time. But I found wisdom. Then that's why I always had to turn to Black voices and Indigenous voices, right? Just who knew this already, right? And yeah, I was surprised. I wanted to ask something. Is that okay? I wanted to ask you too. I've been asking a few people, and I'd love to know from each of you, if you're willing. What would you like recovering racists to know?
I think my answer is a lot connected to what you mentioned earlier about feeling fully alive. One thing that I really enjoyed about this book was that emphasis on reclaiming humanity, right? As an African, the principle of Ubuntu, which is basically humanity, resonates so deeply with me. And I was saying before that the framing of this as was, you know, a 12-step sort of program, or looking at it through that lens of recovery, right? I really appreciate that, because with recovery, one of the things that people often say is you realize how big the problem was, or you realize how much it was affecting you once you stop, right? So that reclaiming of when you stop using, you realize how much you've been dependent on this. You realize how much it's been painting so much of your world, right? You realize how it's been influencing every interaction, how racism has been dehumanizing you in so many different ways every single day. And I think what I would want people to know is that freedom that lies at the other side of it. Like, it's very mucky, it's very ugh, but there's so much freedom to then move towards being fully alive, being fully human, being fully, you know, created in the image of love, and walking in that it's, you know, when you would see this book on a shelf, it would feel heavy, because it is, the journey is very heavy, but the promise at the end is like so worth it. And I say end loosely because we know.
Yes.
Just an asterisk on that.
I
But
love you.
that process of walking in humanity, and not having to rely so much on this really messed up thing to shape so much of your world. Yeah. Mm.
I can't wait for your book when it comes out, Lindy.
Yeah.
You have a really powerful way of framing it. Like, you choose your words very carefully, and it's really helpful, and it's really beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
I would also say the same for you, Leah.
When are we doing writing workshop?
I know. Lindy, yeah, you have to read your book to us, please. Yeah. Oh, yes.
I think I would like to remind recovering racists the importance of doing the childhood wound work, inner child work, learning about your triggers and nervous systems, because I think that work is what deepens our capacity to love and to see.
Yeah.
Because this work and life of anti-racism is just, it takes a lot out of you if you're right. It does take a lot. But to see it fully, like, to see the other side of it, to see and hope and dream for a world where this doesn't exist. I think that notion of whatever you call it, you could call it prophetic imagination or hopeless romantic, that ability requires you to reacquaint yourself with your humanity. And I think the work starts inside out. And so to not neglect that work within you. Yeah.
Yeah, we had lots of conversations about little Idelette, didn't we? We have had lots of conversations about her. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. And we bless little Idelette, and right now Idelette, and future Idelette.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
They're the same to you. You know that, right? Oh, wow. Wow.
Idelette, where can people find and buy your book?
Well, it seems to be available on most of the places where books are sold. um, yes, yeah. So just Google it. Recovering Racist, Idelette McVicker. You know, however you spell that. Oh, it's a little orange cover. There we go. It comes up. And yeah, even it's available on Kindle, right? So yeah, there this little baby, this little transformational fire.
Yes.
Yeah, come sit at the fire with me, yes, and let's become transformed.
Thank you so much for sharing your heart about this book and sharing parts of your stories, and thank you for saying yes to getting on this journey, right?
Thank you. This was really nice to talk to all of you together about this. I love this. This was like, wow, I love this. Yeah.
Well, thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Liberating Faith. Make sure to follow us on all the social media stuff, which is somewhere down below or in the show notes. I really need to figure out how to end these things better. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. We will see you very soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.